Hello and welcome to the Tournament Center here at the balcony level of the Paramount Theater in downtown Seattle at the Magic the Gathering World Championship. I'm here with Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch champion JC Tao, and we are talking about a modern deck tech. JC, the last time we saw you, you left Modern a ruin in your wake. Cards had to be banned. You played an incredibly broken deck. Did you bring an incredibly broken deck to this event here?
Not this time, I'm afraid.
So you instead said you went with a fair deck.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean when we talk about a fair deck? What does that imply?
To me, a fair deck implies that you are trying to not only advance your own board state, your own game plan, but also actively trying to disrupt your opponent, stopping them from doing potentially any broken or unfair things that they may be up to.
And then you've described that there's two different ways you can do this, right?
Right. You can either try to discard their hand, pick apart their threats, or you can try to counter them. And I went with the discard plan.
All right, so let's take a look at the weapon of choice you brought to this modern tournament. It's white-black tokens, Bitter Blossom, Lingering Souls, Intangible Virtue. Is this the core of how you win the game?
Yeah, this is the core threat package. It's pretty light.
Okay, so talk about Bitter Blossom a little bit, because this is a card we associate mostly with the Fairies archetype, more the countering route than the discard route.
It acts very similarly here. You sort of play it as soon as possible, and you start focusing on disrupting your opponent afterwards, and just let this card take over the game.
Okay, and then you pair it with Lingering Souls here for some additional creature threats, and then Intangible Virtue. How important is this card to this deck's game plan?
It's one of the best cards in this deck. It increases your clock dramatically. It lets you play offense and defense, and yeah, you want to draw as many copies of this as possible.
So yeah, you get two of these in play at the same time, then you're spitting out 3/3 Vigilant Fairy tokens.
Right.
Pretty difficult to deal with. All right, let's take a look at some of the ways that you're interacting with the board here. Liliana the Veil has been a modern staple since she was first printed.
Yep. Yeah, she's great. I know this is a little bit different from most token lists, but I went with a slightly more control-ish route. Yep.
And so this is the same thing. You're using her to follow up upon punishing your opponent's hand.
Right. Ideally, you go turn 1, discard, turn 2, Bitter Blossom, turn 3, Liliana, and then go from there.
Maybe you're on the play, you make them sacrifice a Tarmogoyf.
Sure, there's that too.
Talk about Sorin Solemn Visitor for us.
Sorin, and actually I'm going to include Gideon here as well. Those are the more versatile cards in your deck. They can either pump your team or start producing tokens. So if you need, depending on what you need in the situation, they can do a little bit of both. I'm playing one more Sorin than Gideon because the lifelink has been relevant, especially when you're busy shocking yourself to cast Thoughtseize or multiple Bitter Blossoms in play.
Sure, so that +1 until your next turn creatures you control get +1, +0, and lifelink. Huge, again, once you're spitting out all those tokens.
Right.
Now, Zealous Persecution, 2 copies of this card. What is this card? Where does this card play a role in the deck?
It is sometimes you can use it to pump your team for the win, but most of the time is to pick apart your opponent's small creatures. It's excellent against Affinity and Infect, both of which are top tier decks in Modern right now. It also does work against a couple other small decks. Elves, for example, it just won the Invitational recently, so I wanted to be a little bit prepared against that deck.
This is a card I think a lot of people think of maybe as a sideboard card sometimes, although obviously the anthem effect of being able to +1 your team is pretty huge for a token deck. But is this a nod to maybe what you're expecting out of this field?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your disruption package here. Inquisition of Kozilek, 4, Thoughtseize, 2.
This deck does a lot of damage to itself, so I went with a safer plan of having Inquisition, more Inquisition and Thoughtseize, but they're both very important.
Right, and so you open up with maybe a fetch land or something, and then you Thoughtseize your opponent, and then you play a Bitter Blossom.
Yep.
You can be pretty behind the 8 ball there.
Exactly.
You're like, please don't be playing Naya Burn.
Right.
So what are the typical targets for these cards? Do you find yourself taking different things?
You usually want to take their threats. Against most decks, your own threats line up fairly well. 1/1 removal doesn't match up too well against Lingering Souls. So you're more interested in picking apart their game plan rather than defending your own.
Okay. Now, one of the new cards that we see in this list is Collective Brutality, 1 copy, and I'm really interested in this here. Escalate, discard a card. Is that something that you can use to your advantage when you're trying to get multiple modes out of this?
It really depends on the matchup. This card is rarely a dead card. And sometimes it does so much against Naya Born. Like you said, it can gain you some crucial life, take out the Goblin Guide, and discard the Lava Axe. And then against some of the Infect, for example, it does a lot of work there as well, taking away a pump spell and killing their small Infector.
But I'm imagining oftentimes the card you want to discard here is maybe a Lingering Souls.
Lingering Souls or, anything excess, but Lingering Souls will be a great target, yes.
Okay, and then 2 copies of Spellskite, just an emergency, escape valve in case things are going wrong.
This is also actually more of a proactive card. The Spellskite doesn't defend a lot of my own threats. It's there to stop my opponent from going off with Death Shadow or Infect. Occasionally you'll block an Edge Champion there as well.
Okay, just something they have to deal with if they're going to start pumping their creatures, and you can just pay a little life and make them target that instead. Right. Okay, so let's take a look at how you tie this all together. It's a little bit more removal now. You've disrupted some of their stuff. Now there's a couple things slipped through the cracks. Right. Path to Exile, 1 Murderous Cut, 1 Dismember. What's this removal package about?
Well, I'm playing the best removal spell in Modern, 4 of. And after that, I still want to play as cheap of a removal as possible, and those other spells can situationally cost 1. In fact, they often do after your Flurry of fetch lands and discard spells have hit the graveyard. Murderous Cut is a 1 mana destroy target creature. Dismember, I wish there's something else, but Dismember does the job. There's more life loss that I sometimes can't afford, but...
Another card where you get to turn 3 and you're like, somehow I'm at 9 and my opponent's done nothing.
Exactly.
All right, so let's take a look at how you glue this all together now. We see 2 copies of Ghost Quarter, 2 plains, 4 swamps. Pretty self-explanatory there, but I'm interested in this. 2 copies of Vault of the Archangel.
That's another nod to the incredible life loss that this deck is capable of inflicting on itself. It is also there to gain another edge against the other mid-range decks, the Jund, the Abzan decks that have Tarmogoyfs and Tassigurs. You're able to easily trade 1 of your tokens away. So
we talked a little bit about that idea that you could be on your heels from your own sort of self-inflicted damage on turn 3, but if the game goes turn 7, turn 8, turn 9, this is something that if you're fighting against fair kind of creature decks, you feel like this is a card that's going to really swing the matchup for you?
One of the better cards, yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at the rest of the mana, and then we see some of the aforementioned pay 1 life cards. Windswept Heath, 2 copies, Marsh Flats, 4 copies, and then Polluted Delta, 2 copies, and then of course, some Shockland too. Yep. So what's this? Anything insight into this mana base?
No, this is all pretty straightforward. The isolated chapels are. I try to do a lot of math to make sure that they come into play as untapped as often as possible. I think I've gotten it down to where I'm happy with, but those 2 land slots are flexible. They can be swapped with something else.
This is your painless land slot.
Yes.
Okay, JC Tao, I'm really excited to see how this deck plays out in Modern this weekend. Good games the rest of the way here at the World Championship.
Thank you so much.